The subtitle of the book American Crescent by Imam Hassan Kazini lays the groundwork for its introduction. It reads, "A Muslim cleric on the power of his faith, the struggle against prejudice, and the future of Islam in America." Without question, the journey of Imam Kazini, who has become one of the most influential Muslims in America, is a fascinating one. His life begins in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was systematically eliminating any opposition to his authority, and the Kazini family came under suspicion. When Hassan was 6 years old, his father loaded up the family early one morning in 1971 and fled to Kuwait, where he was exposed to a more Western environment. The family heritage comes from a long line of Shiite scholars from the town of Karbala. They claim their lineage to the Prophet Muhammad himself. In 1976, they were visited by a family friend visiting from San Francisco who had established the Islamic Society of California. Hassan was encouraged by this man to consider becoming an imam. 2 years later, he attended a lecture by another visitor from America, where he learned that Islam in the States was like an infant in need of nurturing. This visitor, Imam Shari, was the founder of the Islamic Center of Detroit and had connections with many high political leaders. In 1979, it became clear that Saddam Hussein's thugs were reaching out far and wide in arresting and eliminating Shias and anyone else who might be a threat to him. Many friends and relatives of the Kazini family in Karbala became targets of his terror, and those that could fled for their life to Kuwait and some to Iran. About this time, Hassan's father decided it was time to move to the town of Qom in Iran, a place famous for its large seminary. The Ayatollah Khomeini was the big name at that time, and Islamic revolution was the buzzword. It was here that Hassan broadened his linguistic skills from Arabic to the more popular Persian Farsi. Graduating from a seminary which claimed the most eminent Shia faculty in the world, he was exposed to a different climate, terrain, and political scene. The Shah had been forced into exile in 1979, and Saddam went to war against Iran. Iran's Islamic Revolution was causing U.S. officials to get concerned that it might spread to Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, where it had oil interests. The U.S. was stuck between a rock and a hard spot, trying to figure out who to trust and who to sell weapons to. In 1983, a short time after he was married, he made his first Hajj to Mecca. There he became more aware of the differences between the Saudi Arabian Wahhabi form of Islam and his Shia tradition. At times, he uses the history of Shia persecution by Wahhabis as a platform to appease Christian and Jewish complaints regarding their persecution by Muslims. He points out that the Shiites are not allowed to build mosques in Saudi Arabia, much like the ban on churches and synagogues, suggesting that we have much in common. Blaming the relatively recent Wahhabi movement for persecution of Shiites and non-Muslims is a rather simplistic rewrite of history, however, because the split between the Sunnis and the Shiites dates back to shortly after the death of Muhammad, and he admits how those related to the Prophet were pressured out of power, and eventually Imam Ali was murdered. The power struggle between these two factions continues to this day. The book has many photos of Imam Kazini with George W. Bush, Al Gore, Colin Powell, Nancy Pelosi, as well as Congressman John Dingell. Because of his background, he has been a sounding board for those seeking advice about not only the Middle East, but American Muslims as well. Dingell invited him to give the opening prayer for the 108th Congress in 1997. Now, this is the same Dingell who voted against solidarity with Israel back in 2001. While Kazini buddies up to liberal ecumenical church leaders, he's quick to condemn Pat Robertson and Franklin Graham on page 164 as, quote, stuntmen in cleric's garb, not true arbiters of the faith. In the same breath, he lists others such as Jerry Vines, the past president of the Southern Baptist Convention, for being critical of Islam. Then he condemned Christian evangelism during war because the people are desperate and easy targets. I guess the history of conversion to Islam at the point of the sword should have been mentioned as well, but that was conveniently avoided. It might be worth pointing out that the Ayatollah Khomeini was a Shiite who taught at the same university, Qum, and called America the Great Satan, and it was he that issued a fatwa back in 1989 to kill Salman Rushdie for his book that was offensive to Islam. By 2006, Khomeini had spoken to more than 230 churches, colleges, and civic groups. He often quotes the Hadith to make his points and is mystified by the fact that Americans still have a negative view of Islam. Maybe it's because Americans are becoming more familiar with the Quran and it is more difficult to blow smoke up our pants leg. Then, aside from the book, in an interfaith dialogue with some Lutherans, he claims that hunting for sport is un-Islamic and eating fish without scales will upset the equilibrium of the ocean. Now, this kind of nonsense is laughable to the thousands of hunters and fishermen in our country, most of which are excellent stewards of God's creation, and our government goes to great lengths to monitor the harvest of wildlife. Those that own guns might take this message to mean we should all give up our guns as well. Well, good luck with that. The Imam cites the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE, often as a reference, which is not likely to help him much given their dubious record. Towards the end of the book, under, quote, Muslim empowerment, he lists a recommended strategy for advancement of Islam in the West, which includes establishing more media connections and working to get more positions in government. He suggests that Muslims should work to make America a pro-Muslim country, as the Jews have done with their religion. He fails to see, however, that the Jews and Christians share the same Old Testament scripture and are pro-Israel, unlike our Muslim friends. The Bible tells us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, while the Quran does not even mention Jerusalem. If the events in Dearborn over the past few years, with Muslims harassing Christian evangelists such as David Woods and Terry Jones, are any indication of the future, we might pay close attention to those not-so-friendly Shiites as well as other Muslims. The only thing that seemed to get their attention was taking the Sharia-friendly officials to court. Now, Jesus said, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves."